Hey everyone! I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I dragged the cloth across the hood of the car for the third time, wiping away an invisible layer of dust. I wasn't doing it because the car needed cleaning. I was doing it to keep my hands busy, to keep the tension in my chest from choking me. There's something unsettling about noticing the tiniest changes in your life. Something so small that if you mention it to anyone else, they'd look at you like you were crazy. But I wasn't crazy. I had started noticing the changes about 2 months ago. Laura's late-night texts. Her phone, once carelessly left on the kitchen counter, was now always in her pocket or face down on the nightstand. She had started going out more frequently. Girls' nights, she called them, staying out later than usual. At first, I believed her. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband sniffing through his wife's things. But the signs were there, gnawing at me like a slow cancer. I stood back from the car, staring at my reflection in the polished surface. The face looking back at me was one I barely recognized. Tired, worn down. The kind of face that makes you wonder when everything went wrong. I wasn't even sure when it started. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I'd been too focused on work, too distracted to notice the cracks forming in our marriage. Or maybe it wasn't me at all. Laura wasn't the woman I married. Not anymore. She was different now. Distant, cold. She had started dressing differently too. Expensive lingerie I'd never seen her wear. Dresses that clung to her body in ways she never cared about before. I asked her about it once, making a joke of it. "Who are you dressing up for?" She laughed. Told me I was overthinking things. "Just trying to feel good about myself," she said, like I was the one being paranoid. I didn't push. I told myself it was nothing, just a phase. But the excuses piled up, and with every new one, the knot in my gut tightened. Small lies, one after another. She'd say she was going to meet a friend, but I'd check her social media later, and there'd be no mention of it. No pictures, no tags, not even a passing comment. Just silence. And silence can be louder than anything else when you're paying attention. I wiped my hands on the rag, tossing it to the side. The garage felt suffocating, the air thick with the tension I'd been trying to push down for weeks. Laura was upstairs, probably on the phone with one of her friends again. I could hear her faint laughter drifting down the stairs, a sound that used to comfort me but now only fed my suspicion. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. It was that I didn't trust myself anymore. Didn't trust my own gut. Was I imagining all of this? Was I overreacting? I didn't want to believe what my instincts were screaming at me, but that nagging feeling wouldn't let go. I walked back inside, the air conditioning hitting me like a wall as I shut the garage door behind me. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, listening. The laughter had stopped. Now there was just the sound of her footsteps, moving lightly across the bedroom floor. My fingers itched to grab her phone just for a second, just to see. But I wasn't that kind of man. Not yet. Dinner was quiet, awkward. Laura smiled, made small talk about work, her friends, the latest book she was reading. She was trying too hard, her words empty, her smile tight. I nodded along, played my part, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was talking to a stranger. That night, after she went to bed, I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling. Her breathing was soft, rhythmic, as if she had nothing in the world to worry about, as if she wasn't hiding something. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but the nagging feeling only grew stronger, twisting my stomach into knots. When her phone buzzed on the nightstand, it took every ounce of willpower not to reach for it. Instead, I asked, "Who was that?" Laura shifted under the covers, her body stiffening for a split second before she answered. "Just Amy," she said, her voice too casual, too quick. "She's going through something." She turned away from me, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. I stared at her back, my heart pounding. That was the moment I knew. I didn't need to see the messages or check her phone. I didn't need any more lies. Something wasn't right, and it was more than just paranoia. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my coffee as Laura rushed out the door for another lunch with the girls. I barely acknowledged her as she kissed me on the cheek and promised to be back by evening. The knot in my gut tightened, the coffee in my stomach turning sour. I waited 10 minutes after she left before heading upstairs to the bedroom. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stood at the doorway for a moment, feeling like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But I had to know. I had to stop driving myself insane with doubt. I grabbed her phone from the nightstand, locked, of course. I wasn't surprised. But it wasn't her phone I was after this time. It was her laptop sitting on the desk in the corner, still open from the night before. I sat down in front of it, my hands shaking slightly as I moved the mouse to wake it up. The screen blinked to life, and there it was, her email, wide open. At first, it looked like nothing. Just the usual junk mail, work emails, newsletters she never bothered to unsubscribe from. But then, buried beneath the clutter, I saw it. An email confirmation for a flight. My breath caught in my throat as I clicked on it. A 4-week vacation to Europe. My mind spun. 4 weeks. Laura hadn't mentioned a trip to me. I scrolled through the email, reading the details over and over, hoping it was a mistake, some kind of error. But it wasn't. She was leaving. Soon. I dug deeper, my pulse quickening. I found the messages next, emails exchanged with someone named Eric. They weren't just planning a trip together, they were planning everything. Hotels, dinners, romantic excursions. I felt like I was going to be sick as I read their words. Intimate, explicit. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as the reality of what I was seeing hit me. This wasn't just some fling. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to leave me behind, even if only for a month, to live a completely different life, a life where I didn't exist. I closed the laptop, leaning back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut and left me gasping for air. But as the shock began to wear off, something else took its place. Something cold, hard. My hands stopped shaking, my heartbeat slowing down. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to confront her. No, not yet. I had 2 days before she left. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to get 2 steps ahead. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. The words sat in my throat, heavy and bitter, but I swallowed them down, biding my time. Laura acted like everything was fine. She smiled, made small talk, went to bed without a second thought. I watched her, studying her, every move, every word, every fake laugh. By now, the hurt had transformed into something else. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the arrogance of it all, the way she looked at me, as if I were too blind or too stupid to notice. As if she could live this double life without me ever catching on. She thought she was in control. She thought she could fool me, sneak off with her lover, and come back to the life we built like nothing ever happened. But she was wrong. So wrong. I stayed up late that night, the darkness of the house matching the cold fury building inside me. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt or broken. I wasn't going to let her win. No, I would handle this differently. She wouldn't see it coming. When she boarded that plane, she'd think she was leaving me behind, stepping into a perfect little fantasy with her affair. But by the time she landed, everything would be different. Her world would come crashing down around her, and she wouldn't even know what hit her. I wasn't just going to end this. I was going to destroy her. The morning after I found the emails, I woke up before Laura. I couldn't sleep much after that discovery. My mind kept playing back the words I read, the plans they made behind my back. Her lover's name, Eric, was burned into my thoughts like a brand. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see her typing out her fantasies, her promises to him. She wasn't just cheating, she was already gone, mentally, emotionally. I had been living in a ghost of a marriage. I slid out of bed carefully, making sure not to wake her. She was still curled up, sleeping peacefully, as if she wasn't about to shatter everything we'd built together. I stared at her for a moment. How could she sleep so easily, knowing what she was planning to do? I slipped downstairs, grabbed my phone, and started running through everything I needed to do. There were 2 days before she left. That was all the time I had to set things in motion, to make sure she'd never forget what she was about to throw away. I had to act fast, but carefully. If I tipped her off too soon, she'd find a way to explain everything, twist the truth, or worse, disappear before I was ready. The first thing I did was make a list. I'm a planner by nature. I work in finance, so details matter. Everything had to be methodical, cold. There wasn't room for emotion anymore. I needed to hit her where it hurt, but it had to be subtle. If I reacted too strongly, I'd look like the villain in this story. I couldn't afford that. I had to be 2 steps ahead. I glanced at her phone on the counter while I brewed coffee. It was locked, of course, but that didn't matter. I'd already gotten what I needed from her laptop. Emails, hotel reservations, confirmations for their romantic getaway. I felt a knot tighten in my chest again, that familiar weight of betrayal. I crushed it down. I couldn't let emotions get in the way now. There was too much to do. Laura woke up about an hour later. She came downstairs, acting normal, as if nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips barely brushing against my skin. That slight, hollow affection used to cut deep, but now it just disgusted me. She smiled, the same smile she gave me every morning, and poured herself a cup of coffee. She made small talk, asked if I had any plans for the day. No, I said, keeping my voice even. Just work stuff. She nodded, taking her cup to the table, scrolling through her phone like she always did. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she was messaging him. If they were laughing at me, making plans to disappear for 4 weeks while I sat here like a fool, waiting for her to return. I swallowed my anger. Not yet. Timing was everything. I went upstairs, leaving her to her routine. As soon as I was alone, I began digging deeper. I opened her laptop again, searching through more emails, her calendar, even her social media. She was good at covering her tracks, better than I gave her credit for. But there were always cracks in the facade. The flight details I found last night were only the start. There were more hotel bookings, all under her name. Romantic dinners planned at high-end restaurants. She'd even set up a new joint account with Eric to pay for their trip. I felt sick. I couldn't believe how deep the betrayal went. It wasn't just about sex. It was about a whole new life she was building with him. A life where I was nothing more than a footnote. By noon, she left to run errands. I barely acknowledged her as she kissed me goodbye, her words bouncing off me like rubber. The moment she was gone, I called in sick to work. This was more important than any meeting or project. I had to finish setting up everything. I spent the rest of the day closing down our shared accounts, rerouting the automatic payments for the mortgage, the utilities, everything. The house would still be mine, but she'd have no access to it. No safety net when she returned from her fantasy vacation. I transferred most of the money into an account she couldn't touch. I left just enough in the joint account to make her think everything was normal, at least for a little while longer. After all, she was planning to leave soon. She wouldn't check until it was too late. I called a moving company next. I arranged for all her things to be packed and delivered to her mother's house while she was on the plane. Clothes, jewelry, furniture, everything. I didn't want her in my house when she came back. By the time she landed, her entire life would be waiting for her in boxes. But it wasn't just about her stuff. It was about making sure she felt every bit of the betrayal I did. The life she thought she was walking away from would be gone by the time she returned, and I would be gone too. As the day wore on, the gravity of what I was doing sank in. I wasn't just ending our marriage. I was dismantling everything she had built in secret, piece by piece. The satisfaction was cold but potent. I couldn't stop now. That evening when she came back, she acted like everything was fine. She smiled, chatted about her day, made dinner like nothing was wrong. It was almost pathetic, watching her try to play the perfect wife while she was texting her lover on the side. I couldn't help but wonder if she felt guilty. Did she even care about what she was doing to us? Or was she so far gone that this was all just a game to her? We ate dinner in silence. I barely spoke. Every time she opened her mouth to ask me something, I gave her one-word answers, pretending I was tired from work. She didn't press. I could feel the distance between us growing like a chasm, and it was almost comforting now. Soon, it would all be over. Later that night, after she went to bed, I opened her laptop one last time. This time, I found something new. A draft email she had started but never sent. It was addressed to me, dated months ago. I clicked on it, my heart pounding. The subject line was simple: I'm sorry. The email was long, filled with apologies, regret, and what sounded like genuine guilt. She wrote about how she felt neglected, about how our marriage had drifted apart. She said she didn't want to hurt me, but she had been lonely for so long that she made a terrible mistake. The words, "I still love you," were scattered throughout the message, like she was clinging to something that had already died. It didn't soften me. If anything, it made things worse. This wasn't a mistake. It was a conscious decision, made over and over again. She wasn't some victim of circumstance. She had chosen to betray me, to walk away from our life and into someone else's arms. The fact that she hadn't even sent the email only proved that she didn't have the courage to face what she'd done. I closed the laptop, my hands steady, my mind clear. This wasn't about guilt or love anymore. This was about control. She thought she could play both sides, keep me as her safety net while she ran off to live her fantasy. She was wrong. The next morning, she was out of the house early, running more errands. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, watching the clock. In less than 24 hours, she'd be on that plane, leaving me behind without a second thought. And she had no idea what was coming. I spent the day finalizing everything. I called the moving company again, confirming the delivery schedule. I contacted the bank, made sure all her cards would be canceled by the time she was in the air. I even drafted a note to leave on the kitchen table, a simple goodbye, detailing everything I knew and everything I'd done. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her choices when she came back to an empty house. As the hours ticked by, I felt a strange calm settle over me. There was no more anger, no more hurt, just cold, calculated clarity. She had made her choice. Now it was time for her to live with the consequences. That evening, she came home, her usual fake smile plastered on her face. She didn't suspect a thing. We ate dinner together again, the silence between us louder than any argument could have been. She went to bed early, saying she had an early flight the next day. I stayed up late, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the clock. By this time tomorrow she'd be gone, and everything she thought she could rely on would be gone too. Before heading upstairs, I took out my phone and pulled up the number for her mother. I dialed it, waited for the familiar voice to pick up. After a few minutes of small talk, I said it. "Laura's going to need a place to stay when she comes back." Her mother hesitated on the other end, confusion evident in her tone. "What do you mean, Nick?" I kept my voice steady, cold. "She'll explain when she gets back, but everything she owns will be at your house by the end of the week." There was silence on the other end, but I didn't wait for a response. I hung up the phone and placed it on the table. I was ready. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of Laura's departure, I felt nothing. The cold clarity that had settled over me was now my shield. I moved through the house with purpose, every step a calculated part of the plan. There was no sadness, no hesitation, just the chilling realization that everything would change today. Laura was buzzing with excitement as she packed. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as she darted from room to room, gathering last-minute things for her trip with the girls. She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. And it wasn't because of me. The thought should have stung, but instead, it only solidified my resolve. This was a woman living in a fantasy, completely unaware that reality was about to slam into her like a freight train. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, pretending to read emails on my phone as she babbled on about her itinerary. She was rehearsing the lie, making sure all the details were in place. I nodded occasionally, giving her nothing to suspect, nothing to question. In less than 2 hours, she would walk out that door and step into the trap I'd set. She would leave thinking she was getting away with everything. But by the time she boarded that plane, her entire world would collapse around her. She left her luggage by the door and came over to kiss me goodbye. The same peck on the cheek as always, empty, meaningless. Her phone was in her hand, already buzzing with messages. I didn't have to guess who they were from. "Don't work too hard while I'm gone," she said with a playful smile, her eyes lighting up in a way that used to be reserved for me. "I'll miss you." It was almost laughable. "I'll be fine," I said, my voice steady. "You have a good trip." She gave me one last smile before grabbing her bags and heading for the door. The moment she left, I felt the air change. The house, for the first time in weeks, felt still. I could breathe again. Now it was time. I picked up the phone and called the moving company. They were already en route. Every detail was falling into place, just as I had planned. Laura's entire life would be packed up and shipped off to her mother's house while she was on that plane, completely unaware of the destruction waiting for her. By the time she landed, there would be nothing left for her here. I glanced at the clock. She'd be at the airport soon, excited, thrilled, thinking she'd fooled me, that her secret was safe. But she had no idea I was already 2 steps ahead. I opened my laptop, reviewing the final details. Her bank accounts were frozen, her credit cards canceled. I left just enough in her name to get her through the first leg of the trip, enough for her to think she was still in control. But the moment she touched down, she'd find herself stranded, with no money and nowhere to go. I felt a strange calm wash over me as I typed out the note. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. I detailed everything: the lies, the affair, the flight itinerary, Eric's name, just so she knew how deep I had dug. I ended it with a simple message: check with your mom. I placed the note on the kitchen counter, right next to her keys. She wouldn't need them anymore. The locks were already being changed. This house, this life, was no longer hers. As I sat back in the chair, the gravity of it all hit me. I wasn't just ending our marriage. I was erasing her from my life, erasing the version of me that had been foolish enough to trust her. The man I had been, the devoted husband, the forgiving partner, was gone. I wasn't that person anymore. And after today, neither was she. I got up, pacing the kitchen, the cold tile under my bare feet grounding me in the moment. I was ready for this. I had planned for every possibility, every reaction. There was nothing she could say or do to fix what she had broken. And I wasn't interested in hearing her try. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from Laura sent just before she reached the airport. "Almost there. Love you." The casual cruelty of it made my blood run cold. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without a reply. There was nothing left to say. I waited for the second call, the one I knew was coming. The moving company confirmed they were at the house, packing everything up. Her clothes, her jewelry, the furniture she loved so much. Every trace of her life here was being boxed up and shipped away, just like she had planned to do with me. I felt nothing as I gave them the final go-ahead. It was almost mechanical, like flipping a switch. They would be done by the end of the day. By the time she landed, there would be nothing left for her here. The thought was satisfying in its simplicity. There would be no confrontation, no messy arguments. She would return to an empty house and an empty life. That was enough. But as the hours passed, the weight of what I was doing started to settle in. I wasn't just ending her life. I was ending mine too. The version of us that had once been happy, that had once believed in each other, was dead. And no amount of revenge could bring that back. I glanced at the clock. Laura's flight would be boarding soon. I imagined her sitting at the gate, smiling, texting Eric, thinking about their perfect little getaway. The image of her with him, laughing at my expense, fueled the cold fire inside me. She had no idea what was coming. I pulled up her flight information, the same itinerary I had found in her emails, and watched the departure time tick closer. It was almost over. Everything was in motion, and soon she'd be gone. But then something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize flashed on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Nick?" It was a man's voice, calm, too calm. "I think you know who this is." "Eric." I could feel the air in the room shift as his voice filled my ear. There was no panic, no desperation, just control. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "I know what you've done," he continued, his tone unnervingly smooth. "And I don't care." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected panic, maybe even rage, but there was nothing, no emotion. He was indifferent, detached, as if this was all just a game to him. Laura and I, he paused, letting the silence hang. It was never serious. She means nothing to me. I stood frozen, the phone pressed against my ear as his words sank in. I had built this entire plan, this meticulous revenge, on the idea that Laura was leaving me for him, that she had thrown away our life for something real. But to him, she was nothing. And just so we're clear, Eric continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, if you try to come after me, you'll regret it. The threat was subtle, but it was there. He wasn't just some guy she had met at a bar. He had connections, influence, people who could make my life hell if I wasn't careful. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He had won before I even realized there was a game. He hung up, leaving me standing in the kitchen, the silence around me suddenly deafening. My chest tightened as I realized the full extent of what I had done. This wasn't just about Laura anymore. I had been so focused on destroying her life that I hadn't seen the bigger picture. Eric wasn't running scared. He was walking away clean, leaving me to deal with the mess. I sat down, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The revenge I had planned so meticulously was crumbling before my eyes. I had thought I was 2 steps ahead, but I hadn't considered the real danger. Eric was untouchable, and I was about to be caught in the crossfire. For the first time since this all began, doubt crept in. The certainty, the cold calculation that had driven me, wavered. What if this wasn't the clean break I had envisioned? What if this spiraled out of control? I stared at the note I had written for Laura, sitting on the counter, waiting for her return. The satisfaction I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a gnawing unease. The revenge wasn't clean anymore. It was toxic, seeping into every part of my life. And now, it wasn't just about Laura, it was about survival. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't as in control as I thought I was. I wasn't 2 steps ahead, not anymore. The day before Laura's flight, everything was in motion. I watched her move through the house like nothing was wrong, her excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. She didn't notice the cool distance in my voice or the way my eyes lingered on her every move. In her mind, she had won. She was on the verge of escaping, off to live her fantasy for 4 blissful weeks. But she had no idea. That morning, as she showered, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the goodbye note I had written. The paper felt heavy in my hands, even though it was only a few short lines. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. The note was cold, brutal in its simplicity. I laid it on the counter, carefully positioning it next to her car keys. By the time she saw it, everything would have already fallen apart. My phone buzzed. It was the moving company, confirming they were ready to load the last of her belongings into the truck. Her entire life, packed away in cardboard boxes, waiting to be delivered to her mother's house. It was almost poetic. I glanced at the clock. Her flight was scheduled for late afternoon. I had a few hours left before everything unraveled. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt calm, like a man who had finally found his footing after a long, disorienting storm. Laura came downstairs, her hair still wet, a soft hum on her lips. She smiled at me, her eyes sparkling with the excitement she didn't bother to hide. She poured herself a coffee and joined me at the table, talking about her day like it was any other. I nodded, pretended to listen, but all I could think about was what was coming. The reckoning. "I'll head out early, get to the airport ahead of time," she said, a little too casually. "Don't wait up. My flight's late. I'll text you when I land." She smiled, that same plastic smile I had grown to despise. The smile that used to make me feel warm inside, that now only made my stomach churn. I nodded, watching her sip her coffee, oblivious to the destruction waiting just around the corner. By the time she grabbed her suitcase and kissed me on the cheek, I was already picturing it. The airport, the frantic call to her mother, the moment she realized her life was over. "Have a good trip," I said, my voice steady. She barely noticed the edge to it, too wrapped up in her excitement. "I will," she replied, giving me one last look before she walked out the door. The second the door clicked shut, I was on my feet. I grabbed my phone and called the bank, confirming the final freeze on her accounts. I canceled her credit cards, locked down the joint accounts. Everything was in place. By the time she boarded the plane, she wouldn't have a dime to her name. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, letting it all sink in. The house felt different, emptier, quieter. This was it, the culmination of everything I had planned. But instead of the satisfaction I expected, there was only a hollow kind of calm. I wasn't done yet. There was still one final piece to move. I drove to the airport. As I sat in the car parked outside the terminal, I watched the people stream through the sliding glass doors. Hundreds of faces, rushing toward their next adventure, oblivious to the personal hell that was about to unfold. I had no intention of going inside. I didn't need to see her. All I needed was to know she was there, to know the trap was closing. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down at the screen. It was a message from her. At the gate. Everything went smoothly. Love you. The casual cruelty of it hit me again, but this time I didn't delete the message. I stared at it for a moment before opening the app I had prepared. A single tap on my phone, and the final part of my plan was triggered. I had scheduled it perfectly. The moment her flight was set to board, her phone would buzz with a notification she wouldn't be able to ignore. And just like that, everything would come crashing down. I waited, my pulse steady, as the minutes ticked by. It wasn't long before my phone rang. Laura. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered, saying nothing. Nick? Her voice was frantic, shaky, nothing like the confident tone she'd used that morning. What's happening? My mom just called. She said all my stuff is at her house. I didn't respond, just listened to her panic unfold on the other end of the line. Nick, what the hell is going on? Her voice cracked, fear creeping in. Where are you? What is this? There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, rapid, unsteady. The weight of her betrayal was finally sinking in. You thought I wouldn't find out, I said quietly, my voice steady, cold. You thought you could just walk away from everything and I'd never know. She was silent for a long moment, and then just barely, I heard her whisper, I'm sorry. Too late for that, I said. Check with your mom. Before she could respond, I hung up. I sat in the car, the quiet of the moment enveloping me. She wouldn't call again. I knew that. I could picture her now, standing in the middle of the terminal, trying to piece it all together. And then the final blow. I waited, counting the minutes. It didn't take long. Her lover, Eric, would have received the same notification by now. A simple message, automated, pre-written. It detailed everything. Laura's betrayal, the affair, and the consequences that followed. I had timed it perfectly, ensuring he would back out before she even had the chance to board the plane. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Laura. It was Eric. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. It's over, he said, his voice clipped, almost bored. She's nothing to me, and I'm not getting involved in whatever mess you two made. I'm out. The cold detachment in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't the frantic lover I had imagined. This was a man who had played the game before, a man who knew how to walk away clean. I don't care about her, he continued, his tone flat. I suggest you move on. There's nothing left to fight over. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, gripping the phone, my mind reeling. Eric was walking away just like that. No fight, no blowback. He had used her, discarded her, and now he was done. The realization hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about Laura's betrayal. It was about my own foolishness, my own miscalculation. I had built my entire revenge on the idea that Eric cared, but he didn't. He never had. I wasn't the only one who had been played. I started the car, the engine rumbling to life beneath me. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt victorious. But instead, all I felt was the weight of it all. The emptiness, the cold clarity that had guided me through every step of this plan now felt like a curse. I had destroyed her, yes, but in the process, I had destroyed a part of myself too. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the image of Laura standing in the airport, alone, abandoned by both of us. Her life in ruins, with nothing left but the consequences of her choices. I should have felt satisfied. but I didn't. When I got home, the house felt even emptier than before. The silence pressed in around me, suffocating. The note I had left for her still sat on the counter, untouched. Her keys were still there, a reminder that she wouldn't be coming back. Not after today. I picked up the note, crumpling it in my hand, and tossed it into the trash. It didn't matter anymore. None of it did. The revenge I had planned so carefully had left me with nothing. No closure, no sense of justice, just a hollow, aching void where my life used to be. I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table staring at the walls. The house, once filled with the echoes of our life together, was now nothing more than a shell. Just like me. And in the silence, I realized something I hadn't expected. Revenge doesn't heal, it only hollows. I returned to the house and stood in the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The note I had left for Laura was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that clung to the walls. I picked up my phone, expecting more messages, more attempts from her to explain, to beg, but there was nothing there. I scrolled through the texts she'd already sent, her confusion and fear practically leaping off the screen. "Nick, please talk to me. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Can we fix this?" But none of them were new. I stared at my phone, waiting for the next one, waiting for some sign that she hadn't given up. Part of me had wanted her to keep fighting, to hear her suffering in real time, to remind myself of why I did this. But now, as the hours passed, the silence was all that remained. It was suffocating. I poured myself a drink and collapsed onto the couch, my mind running through the events of the day. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel was gone. In its place, there was only a gnawing emptiness. I had expected to feel some sense of relief, but instead I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. And then my phone buzzed. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced at the screen. It was a voicemail from Laura, her number flashing at the top. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the phone, wondering if I should even bother listening. I already knew what it would say. "Please for forgiveness. More apologies." But something compelled me to press play. Her voice came through, small and broken. "Nick, I don't know what to say. I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't think... I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know I never wanted this. Not really." She paused, her breath shaky, and I could hear the faint sound of an airport announcement in the background. She was still there, stuck in the terminal, with nowhere to go. "I made mistakes. I know that. I thought I could handle it, that I could keep it separate, but God, Nick, I'm sorry." Another pause, longer this time. I imagined her standing there, wiping her eyes, trying to hold herself together as strangers passed by, oblivious to her world crumbling. I thought it was something real. But he left me. He's gone. And now I don't have anything. Please, Nick, I'm begging you. I don't know what to do." Her voice cracked then, breaking into sobs. I could almost picture her, slumped in some corner of the airport, surrounded by people but utterly alone. I don't know where to go. Mom won't even look at me. I tried calling her, but she knows. She knows everything. And she won't take me in, Nick. Please, I need you." She whispered the last words, and then the line went silent. I deleted the message without thinking, but the sound of her voice lingered, stuck in my head like a bad song I couldn't shake. I tossed my phone onto the couch and stood up, pacing the room. The calm that had settled over me earlier was fading, replaced by something far more unsettling. I had broken her completely, but what had I gained from it? The minutes dragged on, stretching into hours. I didn't bother eating, didn't bother doing anything but sitting in that empty house staring at the walls. The satisfaction of revenge had been fleeting, and now all I was left with was a dull ache in my chest. Laura's absence should have brought me peace, but instead it felt like a wound that wouldn't close. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Laura. I didn't listen to it this time. I knew it would be more of the same, more begging, more regret. But it didn't matter. What was done was done. I deleted it, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to 3 more missed calls and a barrage of texts from Laura. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I threw my phone across the room, letting it bounce off the wall. I didn't want to hear it anymore. I didn't want to be reminded of her. But no matter what I did, her voice was still there, echoing in my head, tugging at the edges of my thoughts. I spent the day going through the motions, trying to return to some semblance of normalcy. Work, emails, calls, but everything felt off. Every task felt pointless. The life I'd known, the routine I'd depended on, had been ripped apart along with my marriage. I thought I'd regain control by destroying her, but instead, I'd only destroyed myself. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. The house was suffocating, and the silence was unbearable. I grabbed my keys and left, not sure where I was headed, just needing to get away from the space that reminded me of everything I had lost. I drove aimlessly for hours, through streets I barely recognized, past houses that looked like they belonged to another life. I stopped at a gas station, refueled, then kept going. No destination, just movement, just escape. But no matter how far I drove, the thoughts stayed with me. The plan had gone exactly as I had wanted, but the aftermath was something I hadn't prepared for. I thought revenge would bring closure, but instead, it had left me hollow. My phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. My gut tightened as I answered. "Nick, it's Eric." His voice slithered through the phone, calm, but with a hint of something else, something darker. "I'm going to make this easy for you," he said. "Leave it alone. Stop whatever it is you're thinking. This was between you and Laura. I'm out of it now, but if you keep pushing, well, I know a lot of people who wouldn't mind pushing back." A chill ran through me. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice low. "No, I'm offering advice. Free of charge. Be smart. You've done enough. Don't make this uglier than it already is." He hung up before I could respond. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands shaking. I thought I'd close the book on this, but now I realized it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Eric wasn't going to just let it slide, and now I had to deal with the fallout. The fallout of getting involved with someone far more dangerous than I'd anticipated. The weight of it pressed down on me as I drove back home. What had seemed like a clean, calculated plan had spiraled into something far more toxic than I could control. I thought I had been 2 steps ahead, but now it felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. By the time I got back, it was dark, the house looming like a ghost of its former self. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. This was the life I'd fought so hard to protect, to defend, but now it felt more like a prison than a home. I had shattered Laura's world, but in doing so, I had shattered my own. I stepped inside, the emptiness swallowing me whole. The house was as silent as ever, but this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive. The revenge had been executed perfectly, but the satisfaction was long gone, replaced by something far more unsettling. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it, heading straight for the bedroom, but the dread was creeping in, the sense that everything was slipping out of my hands. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd gotten here, wondering if there was any way out, wondering if, in my quest for revenge, I'd lost everything worth saving. The next few days passed in a blur. Laura stopped calling, stopped texting, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe she had accepted her fate, and I could finally move on. But the silence that followed was worse than the pleading. It was as if everything I'd known had been erased, leaving me to live in the aftermath of my own destruction. And then the whispers started. It began with a few subtle messages from colleagues, questions about my behavior, about certain rumors they'd heard. Eric's influence was seeping into every corner of my life, undermining me in ways I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't going to forget what I'd done, and now he was slowly unraveling everything I had left. The revenge wasn't clean anymore. It was messy. It was dangerous. I had broken Laura, yes, but in the process, I had unleashed something far worse. I was caught in the crossfire now, and there was no way to undo what I had set in motion. The hollow victory of revenge had been replaced by the cold reality that I had started a war I wasn't prepared to finish. The walls were closing in, and all I could do was wait for them to collapse. The weight of everything I'd done began to crush me as I sat alone in the darkened house. Silence filled every corner, pressing in on me like a slow suffocation. The revenge was complete, but instead of the sense of closure or control I'd expected, I was left with an emptiness so profound it gnawed at the edges of my sanity. I'd destroyed her life. I had planned every detail meticulously, executed it flawlessly. But now that the dust had settled, I found myself staring into a void, my own reflection in the mess I'd created. Laura was gone. Eric had washed his hands clean. And me? I was left with nothing but the rubble of a marriage that had already been crumbling long before I struck the final blow. I poured myself another drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass as I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the phone. There had been no messages from Laura in over 2 days. She'd finally stopped calling, stopped texting. She had given up. Maybe she was with her mother now, piecing together whatever was left of her life. Maybe she was just broken, lost the way I felt now. The thought should have brought me satisfaction, but it didn't. Instead, it made the silence even more unbearable. I destroyed her, yes. But what I hadn't realized was that in doing so, I'd destroyed myself too. My phone buzzed, dragging me from my thoughts. I glanced down and saw a new message from an unknown number. My chest tightened, a cold sense of dread creeping in. "Nick, we need to talk." "Eric." I hesitated, my mind racing. I didn't want to respond, I didn't want to engage, but something in me couldn't resist. I typed back quickly, my fingers shaking as I hit send. "Talk about what?" The reply came almost immediately. "You've made things complicated. I thought this would be over by now, but it's not. Let's meet." The unease that had been simmering for days now boiled over. Eric wasn't backing down, and whatever he had in mind wasn't going to end with a polite conversation. He was dangerous, connected, and I knew he wasn't bluffing. The cold, calculated plan I'd thought would be clean and final was spiraling out of control, and I was caught in the middle of it. I ignored the message and set my phone down, my pulse quickening, but I couldn't escape the feeling that the walls were closing in. Eric had let me think he'd walk away, but he wasn't done with me, and now I had no idea how far he'd go, or how much further I'd have to descend into this toxic game just to protect myself. I grabbed my keys and left the house, needing to breathe, to clear my head. The cold night air slapped me in the face as I got into the car, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them leading anywhere good. I drove without a destination, just needing the motion to distract me from the tightening noose around my neck. The city lights blurred by as I sped down empty streets, but no matter how fast I went, I couldn't outrun the crushing realization that I had started something I couldn't stop. Eric wasn't like me. He wasn't playing by the same rules. He didn't care about Laura, didn't care about the wreckage I'd left behind. For him, this was just a game, and he was far better at it than I was. I pulled into an empty parking lot and shut off the engine, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The calm, methodical Nick I had been when I'd planned all this was gone, replaced by a man drowning in the consequences of his own actions. What had I done? I leaned back in the seat, staring up at the sky, trying to remember the moment everything had shifted. The exact point where my revenge had gone from something cold and controlled to something poisonous, something that had consumed me whole. It wasn't just about Laura anymore. It was about everything I'd become. I had taken control of the situation, yes, but in doing so, I had lost control of myself. And now, I couldn't see a way out. I returned home hours later, exhausted but no closer to clarity. The house greeted me with the same oppressive silence, the kind that crawled under your skin and settled deep in your bones. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the empty glass in front of me. The same glass I'd been drinking from since this all began, as if it held some kind of answer. But there were no answers. I picked up my phone, swiping through the missed calls, the voicemails I hadn't listened to. Another message from Eric glared up at me from the screen. "You're not getting out of this clean. Meet me, or you'll regret it." The threat was unmistakable, and this time, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't push it aside like I had with Laura's desperate messages. I knew what was coming if I didn't act. But what was there to do? I dropped the phone on the table and buried my face in my hands. For the first time since I'd found out about the affair, I felt something close to defeat. Not just anger, not just grief, but a hollow, bitter defeat that threatened to swallow me whole. Laura's final voicemail played in my mind, her broken voice repeating over and over, the crack of guilt, the pleading. I deleted it, but it still lived inside me, a constant reminder that none of this had gone the way I thought it would. I had been so sure I was in control, so sure I could handle the fallout, but I hadn't. And now, I was drowning in it. I glanced at my phone again, hesitated, then played the last voicemail from Laura. Her voice was softer this time, tired, defeated. Nick, I don't know what to say anymore. I don't even know if you're listening. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I can't go back to Mom's. She doesn't want me there. And Eric? Well, you already know. I don't have anyone else. I'm sorry, Nick. I'm so sorry. The message ended with her crying, her voice cracking on the last word. I sat there, listening to the silence that followed, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could hear was the sound of her breaking down, the same way I had broken down, quietly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And then, almost without thinking, I deleted the voicemail. But this time, it didn't feel like I was deleting her. It felt like I was deleting myself. The next morning, I woke up in the same clothes I'd fallen asleep in, the empty glass still on the table beside me. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room, and for a brief moment I thought maybe it was over. Maybe the worst had passed. But the moment I picked up my phone, reality came crashing back. Another message from Eric. No threats this time, just one simple line. You brought this on yourself. My heart pounded as I read it, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a vice. He wasn't going to let this go, and there was no way out, not anymore. I sat there for a long time staring at the message, my mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios, none of them good. I had thought I could handle this. I had thought revenge would give me closure, but it hadn't. It had only opened up more wounds, deeper wounds, the kind that wouldn't heal. I had been so sure of myself when this all started, so sure I was 2 steps ahead. But now, I realized I had never been ahead. I had been falling behind from the beginning. And now I was just broken. I stood up, the room spinning slightly as I tried to find my footing. The walls seemed closer than before, the air heavier. I couldn't stay here, not like this. Not in this house that felt more like a tomb than a home. I grabbed my keys and left, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I needed to leave. The door clicked shut behind me, and with it, I realized I had locked myself out of more than just the house. I had locked myself out of the life I used to have, the person I used to be. And there was no way back in. I sat in the car, staring at my phone as it buzzed with yet another voicemail, this one from Eric. I didn't need to listen to it to know what it said. Revenge had hollowed me out, left me with nothing but the broken pieces of a life I couldn't fix. I thought it would heal something, close a wound, but it hadn't. All it had done was open up more. I hit play on the voicemail, but this time, I didn't listen to the words. I just heard the sound of my own destruction, and then I deleted it, feeling nothing at all.